The tickets fell from my trembling fingers, fluttering to the hardwood floor like confetti at a funeral. 2 boarding passes to the Maldives, dated for next week, with Greg's name printed on one and someone else's on the other. Not mine. The sound of sirens wailing from a nearby street on Michigan Avenue barely registered as I stood frozen in our Lincoln Park living room, the room I had decorated with such care, choosing every throw pillow and picture frame to create the perfect home. My perfect life was shattering around me like crystal hitting concrete, and all I could hear was the roar of blood in my ears. Greg stood in the doorway of his office, his face drained of color, mouth opening and closing without sound. The folder in my other hand held bank statements, receipts, text messages, a 3-month paper trail of lies that led to this moment. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me. I gripped the edge of our coffee table, the one we'd bought together at an antique market in Evanston 5 years ago, haggling with the vendor until we got a price we could both agree on. That memory felt like it belonged to different people now. Strangers who'd believed in things like trust and forever. "Linda," Greg finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. "Let me explain." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man I didn't recognize. The salt and pepper hair I'd always found distinguished now just looked gray. The lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled, the smile I'd loved for 15 years, now seemed like props in a performance I'd been too naive to see through. "Explain?" My voice came out steady, which surprised me. Inside, I was screaming. "Explain which part, Greg? The part where you told me we couldn't afford a vacation this year? Or the part where you've been planning a romantic getaway to the Maldives with someone who isn't your wife? I know you're screaming at your screen right now, telling me you saw this coming. But when you're living inside the lie, you can't see the walls closing in. You just keep decorating them. 3 months earlier, I believed I was the luckiest woman in Chicago. 15 years of marriage to Greg Anderson, a successful financial consultant who worked downtown in one of those glass towers that caught the sunrise. We lived in a renovated brownstone with original crown molding and a kitchen I'd redesigned myself, complete with marble countertops and a farmhouse sink. Every Saturday morning, I'd walk to the Lincoln Park Farmers Market, breathing in the crisp air off Lake Michigan, selecting fresh flowers for our dining room table. My routine was sacred to me. I'd stop at the same coffee cart, where Marcus, the vendor, knew my order by heart. Large oat milk latte, extra foam. Then I'd wander through the stalls, touching the heirloom tomatoes, smelling the fresh basil, chatting with the farmers who recognized me week after week. I'd buy sunflowers in summer, dahlias in fall, always arranging them in the crystal vase that had been a wedding gift from Greg's grandmother, a woman who'd taken me aside on our wedding day and told me I was getting one of the good ones. That memory now tasted bitter in my mouth. My life had a rhythm, a predictable beauty that I cherished. I taught 3rd grade at an elementary school in Lakeview, coming home each afternoon to prepare dinner, grade papers at our antique dining table, and wait for Greg to walk through the door with stories about his day. He'd kiss my forehead, loosen his tie, and ask what was for dinner. Small rituals that I thought meant something. The cracks were so small at first, hairline fractures you could mistake for shadows. It started in February, during one of those brutal Chicago winters where the wind off the lake cuts through your coat like a knife. I remember that night so clearly now, every detail etched in sharp relief. We were sitting at that same dining table, my laptop open to travel websites, planning our annual vacation. The radiator in the corner hissed and clanked, pumping heat into our home. Outside, snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, coating the street in white. Inside felt warm and safe. For 15 years, we'd gone somewhere together every summer. Greece, Portugal, the Amalfi Coast. Greg earned good money. My teacher's salary was steady. And these trips were our tradition. The highlight of our year. I remember lying on a beach in Santorini 3 years ago, Greg's hand in mine, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. He'd turned to me and said, This is what life is about, Lynn. You and me, making memories. I'd believed him completely. But when I pulled up flights to Santorini that February night, Greg's hand covered mine on the trackpad. His touch was gentle, his smile apologetic. The restaurant music where we'd had our first date was playing softly from the speaker in the corner, that Italian place on Taylor Street that had since closed down. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. He said we needed to stay home this year. Business had been tough, he explained, running his hand through his salt and pepper hair the way he did when he was stressed. I knew that gesture so well. I'd seen it when his father was sick, when we'd had that car accident 5 years ago, when the market crashed in 2008. It was his tell for genuine worry, or so I thought. Clients are pulling back, he said, his eyes meeting mine with what looked like genuine concern. The market's uncertain. You've seen the news, honey. Everyone's nervous. I've lost 2 major accounts this quarter, and there's talk of more reductions coming. We need to be more careful with our finances, just for a while, just until things stabilize. My heart sank, but I understood, or I thought I did. Marriage is about compromise, about weathering storms together. That's what they tell you on your wedding day, isn't it? For better or worse, rich or poor, in sickness and health. I'd meant those vows. I thought he had too. I closed the laptop and squeezed his hand back, feeling the familiar weight of his wedding ring against my palm. It's okay, I told him, forcing brightness into my voice even though disappointment sat heavy in my chest. We can explore Chicago instead, take day trips to Galena or Michigan City, maybe drive up to Door County. It'll be fun, different. His relief was visible, the tension leaving his shoulders. He stood, came around the table, and pulled me into a hug. I pressed my face into his chest, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with the coffee he'd drunk after dinner. Thank you for understanding, he murmured into my hair. This is temporary. Next year we'll go somewhere amazing, I promise. Another promise that would turn to ash. But that night, I believed him. He kissed my forehead and went back to his office to finish some work. I sat there in the gathering darkness, listening to the hum of our refrigerator, the distant sound of his keyboard clicking, the wind howling outside, feeling the first whisper of something wrong that I couldn't quite name, a disquiet that settled into my bones like the Chicago cold. The receipt appeared 2 weeks later, and I almost missed it. I was taking Greg's wool coat to the dry cleaners, that expensive charcoal one he wore to client meetings, when my fingers brushed against paper in the inside pocket. Just a restaurant receipt, crumpled and soft from being carried around. I almost threw it away without looking, but something made me pause. Maybe intuition. Maybe the universe trying to warn me. When I smoothed it out under the kitchen light, my breath caught. Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, a place we'd been maybe twice in our entire marriage for special celebrations. Our 10th anniversary, the night Greg made partner at his firm, special occasions that warranted the $100 steaks and $300 bottles of wine. The date was from the previous Thursday, a night Greg said he'd worked late at the office. I remembered that Thursday. I'd made chicken parmesan, his favorite, and wrapped a plate for him to heat up when he got home. He'd arrived after 10, claiming he'd grabbed a sandwich at his desk, kissing me absently while scrolling through his phone. The plate of chicken parmesan had sat in the refrigerator for 2 days before I'd finally thrown it out, trying not to feel hurt that he hadn't even acknowledged the effort. The total was $437, 2 entrees, a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, dessert. Not the kind of meal you eat alone, not the kind of meal you eat with a client and forget to mention. My hands started shaking before my mind caught up to what I was seeing. The receipt trembled between my fingers, and I had to set it on the counter before I dropped it. I stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd built, and felt the first crack spider through my reality. The morning sunlight streamed through the window above the sink, illuminating dust motes in the air. Everything looked the same as it had 5 minutes ago, but everything was different. The floor felt unsteady beneath my feet. There had to be an explanation. A client dinner, something he forgot to mention. Greg was busy, stressed. He had a lot on his mind. I was grasping at rationalizations, trying to plug the hole in my certainty. But that tiny voice in the back of my head, the one I'd been ignoring for weeks, was getting louder. I texted him immediately, keeping my tone light and casual, my fingers fumbling on the phone screen. "Hey honey, how was your Thursday? Missed you that night." I added a heart emoji, trying to seem normal, trying not to let the panic seeping through my chest color my words. His response came back within minutes. "Long day at the office, grabbed a sandwich at my desk, missed you too. Looking forward to tonight." The metallic taste of shock flooded my mouth. I read his text 3 times, 4 times, trying to make the words align with the receipt in my hand. They wouldn't. The numbers refused to add up. A sandwich at his desk. Not a $400 dinner at one of Chicago's premier steakhouses. Not wine that cost more than most people spent on a week of groceries. Not dessert shared with someone across an intimate table. I screamed into a dish towel, muffling the sound so the neighbors wouldn't hear. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. Was I crazy? Was there an explanation I wasn't seeing? Maybe he'd taken out multiple clients. Maybe the charges were split wrong on the receipt. Maybe. But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew. Deep down, in that place where we bury truths we're not ready to face, I knew something was terribly wrong. That night, when Greg came home, I showed him the receipt. My voice was steady, giving him every opportunity to explain. I even smiled, trying to make it casual. "Hey, I found this in your coat pocket. Gibson's? That's fancy. Was it a good dinner?" His reaction was so smooth it was almost beautiful. A masterclass in deception that I would replay in my mind 1,000 times later, analyzing every micro-expression, every carefully chosen word. He barely glanced at the receipt before laughing, a warm, familiar sound that usually made me smile. "Oh, that," he shook his head, setting down his briefcase. "Business dinner I forgot to mention. Sorry, babe. It was with a potential new client. Very important. I couldn't tell you before because I wasn't sure it would pan out, and I didn't want to jinx it." He pulled me into a hug, kissing the top of my head. You know how superstitious I am about these things. I did know. He always knocked on wood, refused to open an umbrella indoors, wouldn't walk under ladders. It was one of his quirks I'd found endearing. Now that quirk was being weaponized against my suspicion. "Did you land the client?" I asked against his chest, hating how much I wanted to believe him. "Still pending," he said smoothly. "Should hear back next week. Keep your fingers crossed." His eyes met mine without flinching, his smile warm and familiar. The eyes of a man I'd loved for 15 years. The eyes of a stranger who could lie to my face without a flicker of guilt. I wanted so desperately to believe him. A betrayal this deep doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It seeps in through the cracks like carbon monoxide, invisible and suffocating. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It sat in my chest like a stone, growing heavier each day. I started noticing other things. Small things that on their own meant nothing, but together created a pattern I couldn't ignore. The way Greg angled his phone away from me when he checked his messages, his body language shifting to shield the screen. The new cologne he'd started wearing, something expensive and musky that I'd never bought him. When I asked about it, he said a colleague had recommended it. "You like it?" he'd asked, and I'd nodded, even though I preferred his old scent, the one I'd given him every Christmas. The late nights at the office that seemed to multiply. He'd always worked hard, but suddenly he was leaving at 7 in the morning and coming home at 10 at night. Weekends disappeared into emergency client calls that required him to drive into the office, even though he had a perfectly good home office upstairs. He started going to the gym more often, which should have made me happy. Greg's health had always been important to him, but he'd let it slide the past few years. Now suddenly he was working out 5 times a week, coming home showered and energized, his body changing, becoming leaner and more defined. When I complimented him, he seemed pleased but distracted, as if my approval didn't matter as much as it used to. I felt crazy, paranoid, like I was turning into someone I didn't recognize. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? When the person you trust most in the world tells you the sky is green, you start to question whether you know what blue looks like anymore. I'd lie awake at night while Greg slept peacefully beside me, his breathing deep and even, and wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I manufacturing problems where none existed? Was I so insecure that I was sabotaging a perfectly good marriage with baseless suspicions? I tried to talk to Greg about my feelings, to express the anxiety that was eating me alive. We were in bed one Sunday morning, that lazy time when we'd usually read the newspaper and drink coffee, talking about nothing and everything. The kind of morning I'd always treasured. I feel like we're disconnected lately, I said carefully, watching his face for reaction. Like you're somewhere else even when you're here. He set down his phone and turned to me, his expression so patient, so understanding, that I almost cried with relief. "Oh, Lynn," he said softly, pulling me close. "I'm so sorry you're feeling that way. This project at work has just consumed me. But it's temporary. A few more months and things will calm down." He held me and stroked my hair and told me I was stressed from work, that teaching 3rd graders during a pandemic had taken its toll. "Those kids wear you out, and you pour so much of yourself into them," he said. "Maybe you should see someone, a therapist, just to talk things through, get some tools for managing the stress." He suggested it gently, lovingly, like he was genuinely concerned for my well-being. And maybe part of him was. Maybe people can love and betray simultaneously. But the suggestion planted a seed. If I was stressed enough to need therapy, maybe the problem really was me. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was the unstable one. The gaslighting was so subtle I didn't recognize it as abuse. I actually made an appointment with a therapist, convinced the problem was in my head. Dr. Martinez had an office in a high-rise on Michigan Avenue, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I sat in her comfortable chair for our first session, twisting my wedding ring around my finger, and told her I thought I was losing my mind. She listened without judgment, asking careful questions. "Has your husband given you concrete reasons not to trust him?" she asked. I told her about the receipt, about his explanation. She nodded thoughtfully. "And does that explanation seem plausible to you?" "I don't know," I admitted. "That's the problem. I don't know what's real anymore." Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Linda, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, there's usually a reason. Your intuition is trying to tell you something. The question is, are you ready to listen?" I wasn't ready then. Not quite. But her words stayed with me. Then I found the note. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, one of those false spring days where the temperature hits 50 and everyone in Chicago acts like it's summer. I'd come home early because of a teacher planning day, and Greg's briefcase was sitting on the kitchen counter, unzipped. I wasn't snooping? I swear I wasn't. I was just going to move it to his office, to keep the counter clear like I always did. But the corner of a pink paper was sticking out, and something made me pull it. The handwriting was feminine, looped and careful. The kind of handwriting they teach in expensive private schools, each letter perfectly formed. "Can't wait for our getaway. Everything's confirmed for July. Finally. We can be together without hiding. You make me feel alive again. All my love, V." The paper was scented, a perfume I didn't wear, something floral and cloying that made my stomach turn. I stood there in my own kitchen, in the home I'd made beautiful, holding evidence of my husband's betrayal, and felt the world tilt on its axis. My vision blurred at the edges. The room spun. I had to grip the counter to stay upright, my legs suddenly unable to hold my weight. This was real. This wasn't paranoia or stress or my imagination. This was a love note from another woman to my husband, confirming plans for a romantic getaway. July. The month we usually took our vacation. The vacation he'd told me we couldn't afford. The claustrophobia was immediate and total. The walls I'd painted in warm neutrals, the curtains I'd hung, the life I'd built, all of it was suddenly a cage. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. I stumbled to the sink and ran cold water, splashing it on my face, trying to ground myself in physical sensation. My reflection in the window above the sink looked like a ghost, pale and hollow-eyed. Greg wouldn't be home for hours. I had time. I carefully photographed the note with my phone, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get a clear image. Then I replaced it exactly as I'd found it, making sure the pink corner was sticking out at the same angle. If he noticed it had been moved, he might get suspicious, might start hiding things better. I needed to know more before I confronted him again. I sat down at the dining table to think, trying to force my panicking brain into logical thought. The woman in the mirror across the room looked hollow, her eyes too wide, her skin too pale. I didn't recognize her anymore. Who had I become? The wife who smiled while her husband planned his exit. The woman too afraid to face the truth. My phone was in my hand before I'd consciously decided to call Sarah. She'd been my best friend since college, my maid of honor, the person who'd held my hair back when I had food poisoning in sophomore year and talked me down from 1,000 panic attacks since. If anyone could help me through this, it was Sarah. "Lynn?" she answered on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" I opened my mouth to say I was fine, to make small talk, to pretend. But what came out was a sob. "I think Greg's cheating on me." Silence. Then, "I'm coming over. Don't move." She arrived 20 minutes later, letting herself in with the key I'd given her years ago. She found me still sitting at the dining table, the note's photograph open on my phone screen, staring at it like if I looked long enough, the words might rearrange themselves into something innocent. Sarah read the note over my shoulder. I felt her body tense behind me. "That son of a bitch," she whispered. Then, louder, Okay, this is bad, but we can handle this. Tell me everything." I did. The conversation we couldn't afford, the Gibson's receipt, the late nights, the new cologne, the gym membership, every small red flag I'd been collecting like poison arrows in my heart. Sarah listened, and with every word I spoke, her expression grew harder. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her legal mind clearly processing. Sarah had built her reputation as one of Chicago's toughest divorce attorneys. She'd told me horror stories about betrayed spouses, about hidden assets and secret families. I'd always thought those stories belonged to other people, not me. Never me. "Linda," she said finally, taking my hands in hers, "listen to me carefully. What Greg is doing is not just infidelity. This is calculated. He's planning his exit, but he wants to control the timeline and the narrative. The fact that he told you business was bad, that you can't afford a vacation, while he's apparently planning some romantic getaway, that's financial abuse. He's manipulating your shared resources while lying about your financial situation." Financial abuse. The term felt foreign in my mouth. That was something that happened in obviously bad relationships, wasn't it? Not in brownstones in Lincoln Park with farmers' market flowers and teachers' salaries and 15 years of marriage. "What do I do?" My voice sounded small, childlike. Sarah's jaw set. "We're going to burn him to the ground, but first, we need proof. Real, undeniable, hold-up-in-court proof." That night, I confronted Greg again. I didn't show him the note. Some instinct I didn't know I possessed told me to hold that card close. Instead, I asked directly if he was seeing someone else, watching his face carefully for any tell, any crack in his mask. His reaction was Oscar-worthy. Shock, hurt, confusion, all playing across his familiar features like a well-rehearsed performance. "Linda, what? How could you even think such a thing?" He looked genuinely wounded, his hand pressed to his chest like I'd stabbed him. "After 15 years? After everything we've been through together? I just have this feeling," I started. "A feeling?" He shook his head, ran his hand through his hair in that stressed gesture I knew so well. "Honey, we talked about this. You're stressed. You're anxious. That's why I suggested therapy. These paranoid thoughts aren't healthy." "I'm not paranoid," I said, but even to my own ears I sounded uncertain. "I love you," he said, stepping closer, taking my hands in his. His wedding ring was warm against my skin. "I would never do that to you. Never. You're my wife. You're my partner. How could you think I'd throw away 15 years for some fling?" I wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. When he pulled me into his arms, I let him, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid reality of his body against mine. This was Greg, my Greg, the man who'd held me when my mother died, who'd surprised me with a trip to Paris for our 10th anniversary, who'd patiently helped me grade papers when I was overwhelmed. How could this man be lying to me? We ended up in bed that night, Greg holding me close, whispering reassurances, and I felt his wedding ring pressing against my shoulder blade. "I love you, Lynn," he murmured into my hair. "Only you. Always you." I said nothing, just let him hold me. The note was burned into my memory, those looped letters spelling out my destruction. But tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow I'd know for sure. Tomorrow I'd start looking for real proof. The next morning, I stopped crying and started hunting. If you're still with me, if you haven't turned this off in disgust at my weakness, know this. Love isn't blind. It's paralyzed. It sees everything but can't move, can't act, can't save itself. But paralysis doesn't last forever. Eventually, the feeling comes back, and with it, the ability to fight. I called Sarah first thing before Greg woke up, whispering into my phone in the bathroom with the shower running to cover my voice. "I need to know for sure," I told her. "I need proof he can't explain away." "Good," Sarah said. Her voice was crisp, professional, the voice she used in court. "Meet me at that coffee shop in Wicker Park. The one on North Avenue, 2 o'clock. And Lynn, don't tell Greg you're meeting me." We met at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, far from Lincoln Park where I might run into someone I knew. The place was hipster trendy, exposed brick and reclaimed wood tables, indie music playing softly. The kind of place Greg and I would never go. Sarah was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back corner booth with a latte in front of her. She listened without interrupting as I laid out everything again, more details this time. The receipt, the note, the lies, the gut feeling that something was deeply wrong. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, stirring her latte with mechanical precision, her legal mind clearly formulating a strategy. Then she looked up, and her eyes were hard as diamonds. "We're going to burn him to the ground," she said simply. "But first we need proof. Real, undeniable, hold-up-in-court proof." She walked me through it like a general planning a military campaign, pulling out a notebook and actually taking notes. "First, check his credit card statements for charges you don't recognize. Set up alerts for unusual activity. You have access to your joint accounts, right?" I nodded. Greg had always handled our finances, but I had login credentials. I just rarely used them, trusting him to manage our money responsibly. That trust now seemed laughably naive. "Good. Go through the last 6 months minimum. Screenshot everything. We're building a paper trail." She tapped her pen against the notebook. "Second, his phone. Can you access it?" "Sometimes," I said. "He's usually careful with it, but he's not perfect." "If you can get into his phone, install a tracking app." She wrote down a name, slid the paper across to me. "This one's discreet. It won't show up in his app list. It'll send you copies of his texts, emails, location data, everything. The idea made me feel sick. Isn't that illegal? Sarah's expression didn't change. In Illinois, it's a gray area. Technically, you own half of everything in your marriage, including his phone if it's on your joint account. More importantly, if he's hiding assets or planning to screw you in a divorce, we need leverage. The question isn't whether it's perfectly legal. The question is whether you want to know the truth or stay in the dark while he controls the narrative. Put that way, the choice was clear. I'll do it. Good. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. This is going to be hard, Lynn. You're going to see things you can't unsee. Learn things that will break your heart. But when we're done, you'll have power. You'll have agency. You won't be the victim of his timeline. You'll be in control of your own story. I felt something shift inside me that afternoon. Something cold and sharp sliding into place where my heart used to be. I wasn't Linda the naive wife anymore. I was Linda the hunter, and I was going to find out exactly what my husband had been hiding. The credit card statements were easy to access. We had a joint account that I'd always had login credentials for, though I'd rarely checked it. Greg handled our finances, and I'd been content to let him. I taught third grade. He was the financial consultant. It made sense for him to manage our money. That contentment now felt like willful blindness, like I'd handed him the tools of my own destruction. I logged in that night after Greg fell asleep, the laptop screen glowing in the darkness of our bedroom, and started going through charges for the past 6 months. He was on his back beside me, snoring softly, completely unaware that his wife was building a case against him in the darkness. The intimacy of that moment, lying beside him while exposing his betrayal, was surreal. What I found made me physically ill. I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound that would wake him. Regular charges at luxury hotels downtown, the Peninsula, the Langham, places that cost $600 a night. Multiple charges, spread across months, sometimes twice a week. I clicked on each charge, my stomach churning. February 14th, Valentine's Day. A charge at the Peninsula for $847. That night, Greg had told me he had to work late. I'd made his favorite dinner, pot roast with root vegetables, and it had sat in the oven keeping warm until I finally gave up at 10 and went to bed. He'd come home after midnight, claiming a client emergency. I'd been disappointed but understanding. Now I knew he'd been at a luxury hotel with her. On Valentine's Day, the charges continued. Jewelry from a boutique on Oak Street, purchases totaling thousands of dollars that I'd never seen or received. I zoomed in on the amounts. $2, $400 in March, $3, $100 in April. What kind of jewelry cost that much? The most expensive piece Greg had ever bought me was my engagement ring, and that had been $5,000 15 years ago. Lingerie from an upscale shop in Gold Coast. Multiple purchases, each several $100s. I'd never shopped there. The most I'd ever spent on lingerie was maybe $50 at Nordstrom Rack. Flowers delivered multiple times from an expensive florist, the kind that did elaborate arrangements with exotic blooms. I loved flowers, but Greg hadn't bought me any in years. I bought my own from the farmer's market. Every charge was another knife to the heart, but I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to cry and risk waking him. Instead, I took screenshots of everything, created a folder on a cloud drive Greg didn't know about, titled it Tax Documents 2023, so if he somehow found it, he wouldn't look twice. I saved every image, organizing them by date and category. Hotels, jewelry, lingerie, flowers, restaurants. The amount of money he'd spent was staggering, tens of thousands of dollars over 6 months. I did quick mental math, my teacher's brain calculating automatically. At least $40, years own dollars, maybe more. While telling me we couldn't afford a vacation, while watching me clip coupons and choose the cheaper wine at the grocery store, while I'd been putting off buying new work clothes because I was trying to be frugal, the rage that built in my chest was cold and clean, like ice water in my veins. It pushed out the hurt, the betrayal, the humiliation. Rage was better. Rage was fuel. I could use rage. The tracking app was harder. Greg was careful with his phone, never leaving it unattended. He took it to the bathroom, to the kitchen, even just going to the garage to take out the trash. It was like an extension of his body, always within reach. But everyone makes mistakes. Everyone gets careless, eventually. One Sunday morning in early April, he was in the shower, and his phone was charging on his nightstand. The bathroom door was closed, water running. This was my chance. Maybe my only chance. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone twice, my palms sweating, my heart hammering in my chest so loudly I was sure Greg would hear it over the shower. I downloaded the app Sarah had recommended, a discreet one that didn't show up in the phone's app list. The installation took 90 seconds that felt like 90 hours. I could hear the shower running, Greg humming something tuneless, probably that annoying commercial jingle he'd been singing all week. Any second he could turn off the water, step out, catch me. What would I say? What possible explanation could I give? The app finished installing with a soft chime I quickly muted. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, making sure the charging cable was at the same angle, that the screen was facing the same direction. Then I practically ran from the room, my heart pounding, adrenaline making my hands shake. I made it downstairs to the kitchen before he emerged. Poured myself coffee with trembling hands, slopping some on the counter. I was wiping it up when Greg came down 15 minutes later, fresh and smiling, hair damp from the shower. He was wearing the blue sweater I'd bought him for Christmas, and he looked so normal, so much like my husband, that for a moment I felt dizzy with cognitive dissonance. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. His lips were warm, his aftershave pleasant. "What are you up to today?" "Nothing much," I said, forcing a smile, forcing my voice to sound normal even though my heart was still racing. "Maybe grocery shopping, laundry, the usual." "Sounds good." He poured his own coffee, completely relaxed, completely unaware. "I've got to run into the office for a few hours. Some reports to finish up." Sunday. He was going into the office on Sunday. 6 months ago, I would have believed it without question. Now I wondered if he was really going to the office or to her. To Veronica, Victoria, Vanessa? I didn't even know her name. This woman who was stealing my life. "Okay," I said. "I'll see you later." He kissed me again and left. The performance had begun, and I was playing my role perfectly. The first message came through that afternoon. I was at Target, mindlessly pushing a cart through the home goods section, trying to pretend my life was normal, when my phone buzzed. A notification from the tracking app. My heart stopped. I looked around, suddenly paranoid that someone could see my screen, could see what I was doing. But the aisle was empty except for an elderly woman comparing throw pillows. I opened the app with shaking hands. A text from a number saved in Greg's phone as Tom C. But the message was nothing a business associate would send. "Missing you already. Last night was incredible. When can I see you again?" My vision blurred. The Target aisle swam in and out of focus. I gripped the cart handle to steady myself, my knuckles white, the metal cold and hard under my palms. Last night. Last night was Saturday. Greg had said he was meeting colleagues for drinks, some guys from the office, networking, home by 11. He'd come home at 11:30, kissed my forehead where I sat grading papers, and gone straight to bed. An elderly woman appeared beside me. "Are you all right, dear? You look pale." "Yes," I heard myself say in a voice that sounded nothing like mine. "I'm fine, thank you. Just remembered something I forgot." I abandoned the cart in the middle of the aisle. Random items I didn't remember putting in it. Dish soap and paper towels and picture frames. I walked out to my car on autopilot, my body moving while my brain tried to process what I'd just read. Sat in the parking lot as the spring sun beat down through the windshield and read the message over and over. Missing you already. Last night was incredible. Incredible. Their night together had been incredible. While I'd been sitting at home grading papers on multiplication tables and reading comprehension, my husband had been having an incredible night with another woman. The response came from Greg's phone 10 minutes later. I watched it appear in real time, the typing indicator showing me he was composing a message, then the words appearing. Tomorrow night. Same place. I can't wait to have you to myself. The casual intimacy of it was worse than rage or passion would have been. This was comfortable, familiar. They had a same place. They had routines. This wasn't a new fling, some moment of weakness he'd regretted. This was a relationship. How long had this been going on? I sat in that Target parking lot for over an hour, watching the tracking app, seeing more messages come through. They were planning to meet tomorrow night at the Langham. Room 1247, their usual room. Their usual room. They had a usual room. The hotel kept their preferences on file. Did the staff know them by name? Did they smile and nod when Mr. Anderson and his mistress checked in, pretending she was Mrs. Anderson? Finally, I started the car and drove home. I didn't remember the drive. My body did it automatically while my mind replayed every moment of the last 6 months, recontextualizing every memory through this new lens of betrayal. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched my husband live a double life through his phone. The woman's real name was Veronica Chen, and she worked in marketing at a firm in the Loop. They'd met at a business conference 8 months ago in Miami. 8 months. While I was starting my school year, decorating our home for fall, planning our anniversary dinner, Greg had been falling in love with someone else. The messages were constant, dozens every day. Good morning, beautiful. Thinking about you. Can't focus on work knowing I'll see you tonight. Last night was amazing. You're amazing. I've never felt this way before. Each message was a fresh wound, but I couldn't stop reading them. It was compulsive. This need to know exactly how deep the betrayal went. They had pet names for each other. He called her V. She called him G. Cute, intimate, made me want to vomit. They sent photos, though thank God nothing explicit came through while I was in my classroom. Mostly selfies, her smiling at the camera, him looking at her with an expression I recognized. The same way he used to look at me 15 years ago when we were new and exciting. They planned their future together. The vacation to the Maldives was supposed to be their grand romantic escape. A week at a resort that cost more than my annual salary. After that, Greg planned to ask me for a divorce. He'd been laying groundwork, he told Veronica, making sure his assets were protected, consulting with lawyers on the down low. I just need to get through this summer, one of his messages read. Then I'll tell her. I've been moving money carefully. She won't be able to touch most of it. I've learned from the mistakes of friends who got taken to the cleaners in divorces. I'm being smart about this. My husband was consulting divorce lawyers and hiding marital assets while sleeping beside me every night, while telling me he loved me, while planning our anniversary party. Every message was another crack in the foundation of my world. But I didn't fall apart. I took screenshots. I documented. I built my case with the precision of a prosecutor building an indictment. And I forwarded everything to Sarah, who was building a legal strategy that would ensure Greg's plans to screw me over would backfire spectacularly. Sarah and I met weekly at that same coffee shop in Wicker Park, and I showed her everything. She was impressed by the evidence, her legal mind cataloging every piece of ammunition. This is good, Lynn. Really good. He's admitting to hiding assets in writing. That's going to destroy him in court. But she wanted more. We need to catch them together, she said. Photos of them at one of those hotels. That's ironclad. I balked at first. The thought of following Greg, of actually seeing him with her, made me want to vomit. I can't. Sarah, I can't see that. You can, she said firmly, gripping my hand across the table. You're stronger than you think. And you need this. Not just for the divorce, but for yourself. Right now, there's still a part of you that wants to believe it's not as bad as it seems, that maybe the messages are just talk, that he's not really betraying you. You need to see it to kill that hope, because hope is what's keeping you trapped. She was right, though I hated it. There was still a part of me clinging to the possibility that this was all a misunderstanding, that there was an explanation that would make sense of everything. I needed to see with my own eyes that my marriage was truly dead. So I started tracking his location on nights he claimed to be working late, following the little dot on my phone as it moved from his office to the peninsula, to the Langham, watching it stay stationary for hours. Imagining what they were doing in those rooms while I sat at home, waiting for him like a fool. On a rainy Thursday in late April, I drove downtown and parked across the street from the peninsula. I sat there for 3 hours, rain drumming on my windshield, my breath fogging the glass, the camera with the telephoto lens Sarah had lent me sitting heavy in my lap, waiting. Other people's lives continued around me, taxis splashing through puddles, business people hurrying past under umbrellas, tourists taking selfies despite the rain. The city moving forward while I sat frozen, waiting to witness the death of my marriage. Then they emerged together. 7:30 p.m. The doorman held an umbrella for them, smiling like they were valued guests. And they probably were. How many times had they done this? How much money had Greg spent here, tipping generously so the staff would remember them fondly? Greg was in the suit I'd helped him pick out last Christmas, navy blue with subtle pinstripes. I remembered going to the men's warehouse together, him trying on half a dozen suits while I sat in the waiting area, offering opinions. We'd laughed about something. I couldn't remember what. It had felt like a good day, a married couple doing mundane things together. Now he was wearing that suit for her. And her. Veronica was beautiful in an effortless way that made me immediately aware of every flaw in my own appearance. Tall and elegant in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her hair in a sleek bob, moving with the confidence of a woman who'd never doubted her own worth. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with that polished professional look that came from expensive salons and personal trainers. They looked good together. That was the worst part. They looked like they belonged together, like a matching set. Greg held an umbrella over her head, his hand on the small of her back, the same gesture he used to use with me before comfortable familiarity had eroded those small intimacies. She said something and he laughed, throwing his head back, genuine joy on his face. When was the last time I'd made him laugh like that? When was the last time he'd looked at me with that expression of delight? They kissed on the sidewalk, and I took photos with the telephoto lens, my hands remarkably steady despite the tears streaming down my face. Evidence. Proof. The smoking gun. I captured them in embrace, his hand cupping her face, her arms around his neck. Captured them breaking apart, smiling at each other. Captured him hailing a cab for her, kissing her once more before she got in. Captured him watching the cab drive away, that smile still on his face. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, and my phone buzzed in the cup holder beside me. A text from Greg. "Working late tonight, baby. Don't wait up. Love you." I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Love you. He'd just kissed another woman and texted me love you in the same breath. The audacity was breathtaking, but also the final death of hope. Whatever part of me had been clinging to the possibility of a misunderstanding died in that moment. The shift from sadness to rage was instantaneous and absolute. I had visual proof now. I had evidence that couldn't be explained away, and I was going to use it to burn his life to the ground. I drove home through the rain, going the speed limit, signaling at every turn, my hands steady on the wheel. Greg wouldn't be home for another 2 hours at least. He'd told me not to wait up. I had time. I walked into our house, into the life we'd built, and felt nothing but cold calculation. I poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle we'd opened last weekend, sat at the dining room table, and opened my laptop. It was time to plan the endgame. Sarah had already prepared the divorce papers, ready to be filed the moment I gave the word. She'd consulted with a forensic accountant who specialized in hidden assets, a man named Robert who charged $400 an hour and had the reputation of a bloodhound. He'd already started preliminary work based on the financial documents I'd provided, finding discrepancies that suggested Greg had been hiding money for months. We had documentation of Greg's spending, his affair, his lies. We had his text messages admitting to hiding assets. We had photographs of him and Veronica. In Illinois, adultery doesn't affect the division of marital property legally, but it sure as hell affects public opinion. And I wanted more than legal victory. I wanted him to feel the humiliation, the betrayal, the complete destruction of everything he thought was secure. I wanted everyone who knew us to know what he'd done. You might think that makes me vindictive. You'd be right. But here's what I learned. When someone tries to gaslight you into thinking you're crazy, when they steal from your shared finances to fund their betrayal, when they plan to leave you but want to control the timing and narrative so they can screw you over financially, they forfeit the right to a quiet, dignified ending. They've already declared war. You're just finally fighting back. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. For the next 2 months, I played the role of loving wife with Academy Award-worthy dedication. I smiled when Greg came home, sometimes still imagining the taste of her on his lips when he kissed me. Cooked his favorite meals, pot roast and chicken parmesan and the lasagna he always requested. Asked about his day and listened to his lies with an interested expression, nodding at the right moments, asking follow-up questions. We made love, and I pretended to feel something other than disgust. Closed my eyes and thought about revenge, about the moment I would reveal everything. That fantasy was more arousing than anything Greg did to my body. Sometimes I'd imagine the look on his face when he realized I knew everything. That image could bring me to climax when his touch no longer could. I discussed summer plans, suggesting local activities since we weren't traveling. Maybe we could rent a cabin in Wisconsin for a long weekend, I suggested one night over dinner. Nothing expensive, just us, away from the city. That sounds nice, Greg said, and he seemed to mean it. Let's look into it. We both knew it would never happen. He'd be in the Maldives with Veronica. I'd be planning my next move. But we played our roles. I even helped him shop for a new suitcase, knowing exactly what trip he planned to take. We went to a luggage store in the Loop, and I helped him choose a sleek black carry-on with spinner wheels. This one's nice, I said, running my hand over the smooth exterior. Lightweight but durable. Perfect, he said, smiling at me with what looked like genuine affection. Thanks for helping me pick. Of course, I said. What are wives for? The psychological toll was immense. I started having panic attacks in my car, pulling over on Lakeshore Drive to breathe into a paper bag, my heart racing, my vision tunneling. Lost 15 pounds because food tasted like cardboard. Everything I ate turned to ash in my mouth. My clothes hung loose on my frame. My students noticed. Ms. Anderson, are you okay? One of my third graders asked one afternoon. Tommy Chen, a sweet kid with gap-toothed smile and a tendency to worry about everyone. His 8-year-old face was creased with concern that made my heart ache. I'm perfect, sweetheart, I told him, forcing a smile. Just thinking about summer vacation. The lie came so easily now. I was becoming someone new, someone harder, and I wasn't sure if I liked her, but I needed her to survive this. The old Linda, the trusting one who believed in promises and forever, she was too soft for what was coming. She would have crumbled. This new Linda, cold and calculating, she was built for war. There was one close call that nearly derailed everything. It was a Saturday morning in June, unseasonably hot, the kind of day where Chicago's humidity makes the air feel like soup. Greg was home, working in his office while I did laundry, folding his shirts with mechanical precision. thinking about how I'd soon be folding only my own clothes. His phone was charging in the kitchen, and a notification lit up the screen. A message from Veronica. I couldn't help myself. Even though I had the tracking app, even though I could read all his messages remotely, there was something compelling about seeing them appear in real time on his actual phone. I picked it up to read it, forgetting for a crucial second about the smartwatch on his wrist in the office. Greg's watch was synced to his phone. Anytime someone picked up his phone, it would buzz, alerting him. A feature I'd set up myself years ago when he kept losing his phone in the house. The notification was innocent enough. Can't wait to see you tonight. Dinner at 7? But I heard his chair scrape back in the office, footsteps in the hallway moving fast. My heart stopped. Adrenaline flooded my system. I set the phone down and grabbed a dish towel, turned to the sink as if I'd been washing dishes. Soap and water running, my hands under the stream, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Greg appeared in the doorway, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Did you need my phone for something? No, I said, keeping my own voice light, congratulating myself on how steady it sounded. It kept buzzing and I was going to silence it for you, but I didn't know your password. A lie. I knew his password. It was my birthday combined with our anniversary, the most obvious combination in the world for a financial consultant who should have known better. But he didn't know I knew. He relaxed slightly, his shoulders dropping, smiled that warm smile I'd loved for 15 years. That's sweet of you, but I need it for work. Might be an important client. He picked up his phone, glanced at the screen, and his expression didn't change at all as he read Veronica's message right in front of me. Then he walked back to his office, typing a response I'd read later on the tracking app. Can't wait. See you at 7. Wear that blue dress I love. I stood at the sink, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles went white, my heart hammering so violently I thought I might pass out. That was too close. After that, I was more careful, resisting the temptation to look at his phone, to confront him, to break character. The trap was nearly set. I just had to make sure I didn't spring it too early. The opportunity for the perfect revenge presented itself in the form of our anniversary. 15 years of marriage, celebrated every June with dinner and reminiscing. This year, I suggested something different. A party, I told Greg one evening in late May, while we were having dinner at home. Salmon and asparagus, his favorite healthy meal. Let's throw a big party. Invite everyone. Our friends, your colleagues, my teacher friends. Rent out a private room at a nice restaurant or hotel. Make it special. I watched his face carefully as I made the suggestion. He looked surprised but pleased, probably relieved I wasn't being suspicious about our lack of travel plans. That's a great idea, he said, taking a sip of wine. 15 years is a milestone. We should celebrate. Exactly, I said, smiling across the table at him. We've been through so much together. We deserve a real celebration. If he noticed the irony in my words, he didn't show it. Instead, he lifted his wine glass in a toast. To 15 years. I clinked my glass against his. To 15 years, I echoed, and to new beginnings. We drank, and he had no idea what was coming. No idea that new beginning meant the beginning of his public humiliation. The beginning of the end of everything he'd built on lies. I started planning immediately, but not the way a normal person plans an anniversary party. Every detail had a purpose, a strategic value in the war I was waging. The venue was the private dining room at the Langham, one of the hotels where Greg had taken Veronica. When I called to book it, the events coordinator was so friendly. "Oh yes, Mr. Anderson, we know him well. He's one of our regulars." I bet he was. The guest list was carefully curated. Greg's business partners, including Michael Thompson, his boss, and the managing partner at the firm. Greg's colleagues, all the people he worked with daily. Our friends, the couples we'd known for years, who'd been to our home for countless dinner parties. My teacher friends, my principal, people from my world who respected me, my parents, who'd flown in from Arizona, his parents who'd driven in from Indiana, 60 people who thought they were coming to celebrate our marriage. I hired a photographer, a professional who'd capture every moment, set up a small stage area with a microphone for toasts, making sure the audio system was top quality, created a slideshow of photos from our 15 years together, set to music, sentimental songs about love and commitment, found pictures from our wedding, young and hopeful, vacations where we smiled at the camera, holidays with family, a life that looked perfect from the outside. Everything looked perfect. Everyone would remember this party for the rest of their lives, just not the way Greg expected. Greg was oblivious. In the week before the party, he was almost giddy, his mood better than it had been in months. Probably because his Maldives trip with Veronica was scheduled for 2 days after our anniversary. He'd managed to align his betrayal and his celebration within 48 hours. The audacity was breathtaking. But then again, Greg had always been good at compartmentalizing. It was one of his skills as a financial consultant, he always said. Keep different parts of your life separate. Don't let emotions cloud judgment. I spent those final days in a strange state of calm. The panic attacks stopped. The crying stopped. I felt clear, focused, like a surgeon preparing for a critical operation. Sarah kept checking on me, worried I'd fall apart before the big reveal. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked the day before the party, meeting me for coffee one last time. "Once you do this, there's no going back. Everyone will know. His reputation will be destroyed. Your marriage will be very publicly over." "I know," I said, and I did. I'd thought of nothing else for weeks, playing through every scenario, every possible outcome. He was going to divorce me anyway, Sarah. He was just going to do it on his timeline, after hiding assets, after making sure I'd get as little as possible. He was going to control the narrative, make himself the victim somehow. Probably say we grew apart, that it was mutual, keeping Veronica's secret until a respectful amount of time had passed. Then he'd introduce her to everyone as his new love, and everyone would be happy for him moving on. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into the dark liquid. He doesn't get to control this. He doesn't get to destroy me quietly while protecting his image. If our marriage is ending, it's ending on my terms, with everyone knowing exactly who he is. Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay, just making sure you're certain." I've never been more certain of anything. I secured my finances that final week, following Sarah's detailed instructions. Moved half of our joint savings into an account in my name only at a different bank. Changed my direct deposit for my teacher's salary to the new account. Protected my pension, making sure Greg couldn't touch it. The forensic accountant, Robert, had found hidden accounts Greg had opened, slowly funneling money away from our joint finances. I couldn't access those accounts, but I could make sure a judge knew about them. I gathered every piece of evidence into a folder I'd carry with me to the party, printed copies of the most damning credit card statements, the photographs of Greg and Veronica kissing outside the peninsula, printouts of text messages, carefully curated for maximum impact, the plane tickets to the Maldives. Everything organized, labeled, ready to present. I even wrote my speech, practiced it in front of the bathroom mirror until every word was perfect, adjusted my timing, my tone, my pauses for effect. This was a performance, and I needed to be flawless. The night before the party, Greg and I went to bed early. He wrapped his arms around me and I let him, lying rigid in his embrace. "Tomorrow night," he murmured into my hair, his breath warm against my neck. "Big celebration. I'm lucky to have you, Lynn. 15 years with the most amazing woman. I don't tell you enough how much I love you." I said nothing, just let him hold me. Thought about Veronica in his arms at the Langham, the peninsula, all those hotel rooms where he'd probably said similar things to her. Words were meaningless. Tomorrow, actions would speak. The last time I'd let him touch me. Ever. The morning of the party was perfect Chicago summer weather. Sunny and 75 degrees, a light breeze off the lake. The kind of day I would have once considered a good omen. I spent the day at the salon getting my hair and makeup done, choosing a red dress that hugged my curves and made me feel powerful. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger. Someone strong, someone done being a victim, someone ready for battle. "Big event tonight?" my stylist asked, applying lipstick with expert precision. "Anniversary party," I said. 15 years. Congratulations. That's wonderful. "Thank you," I said, meeting my own eyes in the mirror. "It's going to be unforgettable." The party started at 7 p.m. at the Langham's private dining room. I arrived early to make sure everything was perfect, leaving Greg at home to get ready. The room was beautiful, decorated in silver and white, fresh flower arrangements on every table, courtesy of the expensive florist Greg had been buying flowers from for months. I'd hired the same one deliberately. The irony pleased me. The slideshow played on a large screen at the front of the room, photos rotating through our 15 years. Our wedding day, both of us so young. Our honeymoon in Hawaii, birthdays and holidays and vacations. A life that looked perfect from the outside. The photographer I'd hired was setting up equipment, and I confirmed with him he'd be recording everything, especially anything that happened on the stage. Guests started arriving at 7, friends congratulating us, handing us gifts and cards, commenting on how beautiful everything looked. My parents hugged me, my mother a bit teary already. 15 years, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Greg's parents were more reserved, but kind, his father shaking Greg's hand firmly. Good job, son. Not everyone makes it this long anymore. The room filled with the sound of conversation and laughter. The slideshow played on loop. Waiters circulated with appetizers and champagne. Everyone was smiling, drinking, celebrating love and commitment. Greg worked the room like the charming man he was, shaking hands, making jokes, his arm around my waist when we stood together, playing the devoted husband for one last performance. Sarah arrived fashionably late, wearing a stunning black cocktail dress, her expression neutral, but her eyes meeting mine with understanding. She'd offered to stand near the exits in case Greg tried to run when I started talking. I didn't think he would. Greg's pride wouldn't let him flee in front of his colleagues and clients. He'd stand there and take it, and that would make it so much worse for him. At 8 o'clock, I excused myself from a conversation with some of my teacher colleagues and stepped onto the small stage. The room quieted gradually, people noticing, turning their attention to the front. Someone whistled. Someone else called out, "Speech." Greg looked up at me from his conversation with Michael Thompson, his boss, and smiled. That warm, familiar smile, expecting a sweet toast about our years together, about love and commitment and growing old together. His smile was so genuine it almost made me hesitate. Almost. I held up my champagne glass, and the room fell completely silent. 60 people looking at me with warm, expectant expressions. I took a breath, feeling surprisingly calm. This was it. The moment everything changed. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice clear and steady, projecting across the room the way I projected when teaching a classroom of rowdy 8-year-olds. It means so much to celebrate this milestone with the people we love. Nods. Smiles. Someone raised their glass. 15 years is a long time, I continued. Long enough to build a life, create traditions, develop trust. I paused, letting those words sink in. Long enough to think you know someone completely. To believe in promises made at an altar. To assume the person sleeping beside you every night is who they say they are. The room's energy shifted slightly, some people sensing something off in my tone. A few exchanged glances. Greg's smile faltered, confusion crossing his face. But what happens, I said, my voice gaining strength, when everything you believed was a lie. Dead silence now. You could have heard a pin drop. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folder, setting my champagne glass down on the podium beside me. What happens when the man who said we couldn't afford a vacation this year actually bought tickets to the Maldives? I held up the boarding passes, high enough for the front rows to see. Just not with his wife. Gasps rippled through the room. Greg's face went white as paper. I saw him start to stand, but Sarah was suddenly there, a hand on his shoulder, pressing him back down into his chair. Her expression was pleasant but firm. Stay. What happens, I continued, my voice cutting through the shocked murmurs, when the man who said business was slow actually spent tens of thousands of dollars at luxury hotels, on jewelry and gifts, but not for the woman wearing his ring? I pulled out the credit card statements, held them up, the numbers visible. More gasps. Some people stood, trying to see better. Greg's boss, Michael, was staring at Greg with an expression of dawning horror. The Peninsula, I read from the statements, my voice steady. The Langham, where we are right now, actually. Jewelry from boutiques on Oak Street, totaling over $8,000. Lingerie. Flowers. Romantic dinners at the finest restaurants in Chicago. What a lucky woman, right? Murmurs of agreement, turning to murmurs of shock as people understood. Except that woman wasn't me, I said. While I was clipping coupons and buying the cheaper wine, being frugal because my husband said money was tight, he was spending our money on his mistress. The word mistress seemed to hit the room like a physical force. My mother made a sound like she'd been slapped. Greg's mother's hand flew to her mouth. When the man who promised to love and cherish has been planning his exit for months, I continued, pulling out my phone. The text messages appeared on the screen behind me through the venue's AV system, blown up large enough for everyone to read. I'd set this up beforehand, syncing my phone to the display, just waiting for the right time to blindside you with divorce papers after hiding as many assets as possible. The messages scrolled across the screen. Greg's words to Veronica, talking about moving money, consulting lawyers, planning his exit strategy. Talking about me like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a wife of 15 years. Can't wait to start our life together. I read aloud. Just a few more weeks and I'll be free. I'll finally have the courage to leave. Another 2 months and everything will be settled. Then we can be together openly. Greg stood, his chair scraping back so loudly it echoed. Linda, he started, his voice shaking. This isn't what you think. Let me explain. I looked at him, and I smiled. Not a kind smile. Not the smile of the woman who'd loved him for 15 years. The smile of someone who'd outmaneuvered him at every turn. Explain what, Greg? I asked. That you didn't spend Valentine's Day with her at the Peninsula while I waited at home with the pot roast? That you didn't tell me we couldn't afford a vacation while planning a trip to the Maldives with her? That you haven't been lying to my face every single day for 8 months? He had no response. His mouth opened and closed silently. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the photographs Sarah had helped me print and mount on foam board for maximum visual impact. The images of Greg and Veronica kissing outside the peninsula were blown up to poster size, clear and undeniable. You said we couldn't afford a vacation, Greg, I said softly, but the microphone caught every word. I guess you just couldn't afford a vacation with me. The mic drop moment hung in the air. For a beat, no one moved. Then someone in the back of the room started clapping. Slow, deliberate applause. I recognized her, one of my teacher colleagues, Emma, who'd gone through a nasty divorce herself 2 years ago. Then Sarah joined in, her applause thunderous. Then my parents, my father looking like he wanted to punch Greg, my mother crying but clapping. Then more people, my teacher friends. Several of Greg's colleagues, including a few women from his office who were looking at him with disgust. Not everyone. Some people looked shocked, horrified, frozen. Greg's parents sat rigid, his mother's face crumpling. But I had the majority. The room was divided, but I'd won the court of public opinion. I stepped off the stage, leaving the folder and the evidence on the table for anyone who wanted to look closer. The slideshow was still playing behind me, photos of our fake perfect life, an ironic counterpoint to the truth I'd just revealed. Greg tried to approach me, but Sarah was there, physically blocking him, her lawyer voice coming out. Don't even think about it. Your lawyer will be in touch. Linda, please, he said, trying to see around Sarah. We need to talk about this privately. This is between us. There is no us, I said. There hasn't been an us in 8 months. Now everyone knows what I've known for weeks. How does it feel, Greg? How does it feel to have your secrets exposed? To have everyone looking at you and seeing exactly who you are? His face was a mask of shock and humiliation. Around us, the party had dissolved into chaos. Some people were leaving, hurriedly gathering their things. Others were clustered in groups, whispering. Greg's boss was having what looked like a very intense conversation with him, his expression furious. Clients were there, people who trusted Greg with their money, now learning he was a liar and a cheat. The professional consequences were already beginning. We're leaving, Sarah said, her hand on my arm. Right now. We walked out together, Sarah's hand steady on my elbow, guiding me through the crowd. People parted for us. Some touched my shoulder as I passed, murmuring support. Others stared. Let them stare. Let them all see that I wasn't going to be the silent victim of someone else's cruelty. In the hallway, away from the staring eyes and the chaos I'd created, I finally let myself feel it. The pain, the rage, the grief, the triumph, all at once. It crashed over me like a wave and I collapsed against the wall. Sarah caught me, held me up. I did it, I whispered, my voice breaking. I actually did it. You did, Sarah said, hugging me while I cried, mascara running down my face, my body shaking. You were amazing, terrifying, but amazing. But underneath the tears was something solid. I'd done it. I'd taken back my power. I'd refused to be the silent victim. I'd stood on that stage and told my truth, and I'd made everyone listen. The humiliation I'd just subjected Greg to didn't erase my pain, didn't heal my broken heart, but it balanced the scales. It gave me agency. It let me control the narrative of how my marriage ended. And for now, that was enough. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. By the next morning, everyone in our social circle knew what had happened. The photos I'd taken of Greg and Veronica at the peninsula started circulating through friend groups and professional networks. Someone at the party, I never found out who, had recorded my entire speech on their phone and posted it to social media. It went viral, not in the massive internet sense, but within Chicago's professional circles, shared and reshared with comments ranging from supportive to shocked to condemning. Did you see what Linda Anderson did to her husband at their anniversary party? Greg Anderson cheated on his wife and she exposed him in front of everyone. Good for her. That's so humiliating. She should have handled it privately. The opinions were divided, but the story spread like wildfire. Greg's firm called an emergency meeting on Monday morning. His boss, Michael Thompson, who'd been at the party and witnessed everything, was furious. The firm had a strict ethics policy, and Greg's behavior, the lying, the financial impropriety, the fact that several clients had been at the party and witnessed his exposure, it all reflected poorly on the business. They didn't fire him immediately, but they made it clear his future there was limited. Greg was removed from his biggest accounts, the lucrative ones he'd spent years building. He was passed over for the partner promotion he'd been expecting. His office mates treated him differently, the trust gone. Who wants to work with someone who lies so easily? Worse for Greg, Veronica's husband found out. She was married too, a detail Greg had conveniently left out of his messages to her. I learned this from Sarah, who had friends who knew Veronica socially. Her husband, James Chen, was a corporate lawyer with deep pockets and a vindictive streak. Within a week of my anniversary party revelation, he'd filed for divorce and started making Veronica's life hell in all the legal ways he could. Both marriages were imploding publicly. Veronica's firm found out about the affair, and while they couldn't fire her for personal life choices, the whispers and judgment made her workplace uncomfortable. The romance that had seemed so thrilling in secret hotel rooms looked ugly and cheap in daylight. Greg tried to reach out to me constantly. Calls, texts, showing up at the house before Sarah filed a restraining order. He left voicemails, his voice sometimes pleading, sometimes angry. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. You had no right to humiliate me like that. I never meant to hurt you. Can't we talk about this like adults? I still care about you, Linda. What we had was real, even if I made a mistake. A mistake. 8 months of calculated lying, financial abuse, and planning to screw me in a divorce was a mistake. I listened to each voicemail once, then deleted it. There was nothing to talk about. The man I'd married was gone, if he'd ever existed. What remained was a stranger who'd used my love as a shield while he destroyed everything we'd built. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Greg's lawyers tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone who'd publicly humiliated him out of spite. They argued I'd violated his privacy by tracking his phone and accessing his messages, that any evidence I'd gathered was inadmissible. They tried to claim emotional distress, saying my actions at the party had caused him professional harm and mental anguish. But Sarah was better. She had the credit card statements showing financial infidelity, the evidence of Greg's planning to hide assets, the documentation of his year-long affair. She had his text messages where he explicitly discussed moving money to keep it away from me, which was illegal. She had proof he'd been lying about our financial situation while spending marital funds on his mistress. The forensic accountant, Robert, found accounts Greg had opened in the Cayman Islands, money he'd been funneling offshore in preparation for divorce, tens of thousands of dollars that he'd hidden. In Illinois, marital property is divided equitably, not necessarily equally, and the judge was not impressed with Greg's behavior. "Mr. Anderson," the judge said during one hearing, looking at Greg over her glasses with obvious distaste, "you have demonstrated a pattern of financial deception and marital misconduct that this court finds deeply troubling. Your argument that your wife violated your privacy is noted, but it pales in comparison to your systematic violation of your marital obligations and fiduciary duties. I got the house, my full pension protected, and a significant portion of our joint assets. Greg got to keep his retirement accounts, though depleted by legal fees and the penalties for his hidden assets, and his significantly damaged reputation. The business partner who'd known about the affair and covered for Greg, lying to me at social events when I'd asked about Greg's late nights, also faced consequences. Several clients left the firm, citing ethical concerns. His own wife filed for separation after learning he'd been helping Greg hide the affair. The dominoes fell one by one, and I watched with grim satisfaction. Some people called me cruel, said I should have handled it privately, that publicly humiliating Greg was excessive. A few mutual friends stopped speaking to me, uncomfortable with the drama. But more people supported me. Women reached out with their own stories of betrayal, thanking me for having the courage to stand up. My teacher colleagues rallied around me. My parents were unwaveringly in my corner. "He had it coming," my father said simply. "No one treats my daughter that way." By August, the divorce was finalized. I stood in the courthouse hallway, legal documents in hand, officially single for the first time in 15 years. Linda Anderson, soon to be Linda Morrison again, taking back my maiden name. Sarah bought me lunch at a restaurant in the Loop, and we toasted with wine. "How are you really doing?" she asked, studying my face. I thought about it, taking stock of myself. Honestly, I'm okay. Better than okay. I feel lighter. like I've been carrying a weight I didn't know was there, and someone finally cut it loose. It was true. The grief came in waves still. I mourned the marriage I thought I had, the future I'd imagined. There were nights I cried into my pillow, longing not for Greg as he was, but for the version of him I'd believed in. The loving husband who'd never existed outside my imagination. But mostly, I felt relief. I'd spent months living a lie, performing normalcy while dying inside. Now I could breathe again. I could be honest. I could start rebuilding a life based on truth rather than comfortable fictions. I moved into a new apartment in Lakeview, a bright space with huge windows overlooking the lake. The view was spectacular, worth the higher rent. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, without compromise. Bold colors instead of the neutrals Greg preferred. Art that I loved instead of what looked professionally appropriate. Plants everywhere, turning my space into a jungle. A reading nook by the window where I could watch the sunset over the water. I started therapy, not because Greg had gaslit me into thinking I was crazy, but because I wanted to process what had happened healthily. Dr. Martinez continued working with me, helping me understand the patterns that had made me vulnerable to Greg's manipulation, building tools to recognize red flags in the future. "You're stronger than you know," she told me in one session. "What you did took immense courage. Not the public exposure, though that was bold, but the decision to trust yourself, to believe your instincts when someone you loved was telling you they were wrong. That's the real strength." I went back to teaching in September with a new perspective on life. My third graders welcomed me back with handmade cards and fierce hugs, and their innocence felt healing. Teaching 8-year-olds about multiplication and reading comprehension was grounding, reminding me that life continued, that there was goodness and simplicity still in the world. I also became somewhat famous, at least locally. Women reached out to me through social media, telling me their stories of betrayal, asking for advice. Some were still in their marriages, suspecting but not sure. Others had left, but were struggling with the aftermath. I started responding, sharing what I'd learned about protecting yourself financially, recognizing gaslighting, finding the strength to leave. A local women's organization asked me to speak at an event about financial abuse. I was terrified, standing on a stage in front of 100 women, but I told my story. The response was overwhelming. Women cried, nodded, came up afterward to hug me and thank me. "I thought I was the only one," so many of them said. "I thought I was crazy." It became something I did regularly, speaking at events, sharing my experience, helping other women recognize the signs I'd missed for too long. If my pain could help even one woman protect herself, find her strength, refuse to accept betrayal, then maybe the nightmare had meaning. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. I was relearning who I was outside of marriage, rediscovering interests I'd set aside. I took a pottery class at a studio in Wicker Park, my hands covered in clay, creating imperfect bowls and vases that were mine alone. Started running along the lakefront trail, building physical strength that mirrored my growing emotional strength. Joined a book club with other teachers, discussing novels and drinking wine and laughing about classroom stories. I traveled, too. Went to Ireland with Sarah in October, the trip Greg had promised we couldn't afford. Standing on the cliffs of Moher, wind whipping my hair, the Atlantic Ocean crashing hundreds of feet below, I felt more alive than I had in years. The version of me that had been drowning in that marriage was gone. Someone stronger had taken her place. "You look happy," Sarah said, taking my photo with the cliffs in the background. "I am," I realized. "I actually am." As for Greg, I heard through mutual acquaintances that his life had spiraled. The relationship with Veronica imploded within weeks of their exposure. Turned out, their romance was built on secrecy and lies, on the thrill of forbidden meetings and the fantasy that they were soulmates trapped in wrong marriages. It couldn't survive in daylight, under the weight of reality and judgment. Veronica's divorce from James was vicious, and she blamed Greg for the exposure, for my dramatic revelation that had destroyed her life too. They tried to make it work for a while, but without the excitement of sneaking around, they had nothing in common. The breakup was bitter, each blaming the other for the consequences of their choices. Greg moved to a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, his financial situation constrained by divorce settlements and legal fees. He lost his partnership track at the firm and eventually left altogether, taking a position at a smaller company for significantly less money. His lifestyle, the expensive suits and luxury hotels and fine dining, all of it contracted. He couldn't afford the gym membership anymore, couldn't afford much of anything. His parents barely spoke to him, ashamed of what he'd done, disappointed in the son they'd raised. His social circle shrank as people chose sides or simply avoided the drama. He tried dating, but his reputation preceded him. Who wants to start a relationship with someone known for spectacular betrayal? Who wants to trust a man who lied to his wife of 15 years? The tickets to the Maldives went unused, and he lost the deposit. Several $1,000s down the drain. Every consequence was one he'd earned, one he'd brought on himself through his choices. I didn't take pleasure in his downfall exactly, but I didn't mourn it either. He'd made his bed, as the saying goes. Now he was lying in it, alone. Trust is like a mirror, I learned. Once it's broken, you see the cracks forever. Even if you glue it back together, it's never the same. Greg had shattered our mirror, and there was no putting it back together. Some things, once broken, should stay broken. A year after the divorce, I was sitting on my apartment balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over Lake Michigan. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, and the city was just waking up, the sounds of traffic building, joggers passing on the trail below. My phone buzzed with a message from Rachel, one of the women I'd been mentoring, someone whose husband had been financially abusing her for years. She'd finally filed for divorce, secured her assets, and was starting over. "Thank you," her message said. "Your story gave me courage. I wouldn't have survived this without knowing someone else had walked this path. I'm scared, but I'm free. And that's worth everything." I smiled, typed back words of encouragement, reminded her she was stronger than she knew, that the fear would fade and the freedom would grow. Then I set my phone down and sipped my coffee, watching the sun climb higher. The journey from betrayal to healing isn't linear. There are setbacks and bad days, moments where the loneliness feels crushing, where I questioned my choices and wondered if I'd done the right thing. But there's also freedom. The freedom to build a life based on truth, to surround yourself with people who value you, to know you're strong enough to survive the worst and come out whole on the other side. I wasn't the same Linda who'd found those tickets a year ago, standing in the living room with her perfect life shattering around her. I was someone new, someone harder and softer at once. Harder in that I trusted less easily, questioned more, protected myself better. Softer in that I was more compassionate, more understanding of other people's pain, more willing to be vulnerable in healthy ways. I'd learned that love without respect is worthless, that promises mean nothing without action backing them up, that your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. I'd learned that I was capable of more strength than I'd known, that I could survive what I'd thought would destroy me. And I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, though I won't lie and say the public exposure didn't feel satisfying. The best revenge is living well. It's becoming someone so genuinely happy that your betrayer's opinion becomes irrelevant. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer every day. Now, let me share something important with you, because if any part of my story resonated, you need to hear this. What Greg did wasn't just infidelity. It was financial abuse, a form of domestic abuse that often goes unrecognized. Financial abuse includes controlling access to money, hiding assets, lying about finances, and using economic power to trap or manipulate a partner. When Greg told me we couldn't afford a vacation while spending thousands on his affair, he was using money as a weapon. When he planned to hide assets before asking for divorce, he was attempting financial exploitation. These are warning signs everyone should know. If your partner controls all the money, refuses to give you access to accounts, lies about spending, or makes you feel guilty for normal expenses while they spend freely, you're being abused. Financial abuse often accompanies other forms of control: gaslighting, isolation, emotional manipulation. The goal is to make you dependent, to ensure you can't leave even when you want to. Protection starts with awareness. Open your own bank account your partner doesn't know about. Keep copies of financial documents. Know what assets exist and where they're held. If you're married, you're entitled to information about joint finances. Document spending, save evidence, build a paper trail. And most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't let anyone convince you you're paranoid or crazy for wanting answers. Your instincts exist for a reason. They're trying to protect you. Listen to them. Gaslighting, the psychological manipulation Greg used when I confronted him about the receipt, is designed to make you doubt your own perception. Signs include being told you're too sensitive or overreacting, having your memory questioned constantly, being blamed for things that aren't your fault, feeling confused about what's real. If you find yourself apologizing constantly, questioning your sanity, or feeling like you're always wrong, you're likely being gaslit. The antidote is documentation. Write down conversations, save messages, keep a journal of events. When you have external records, it's harder to be convinced your memory is faulty. And talk to trusted friends or a therapist. Outside perspectives help you see clearly when you're trapped in someone's funhouse mirror of reality. Remember, a partner who truly loves you won't make you feel crazy for having feelings or asking questions. They'll validate your experiences even when you disagree. Finally, know that leaving is possible even when it seems impossible. I thought my life would end if my marriage did. Instead, my life began. Resources exist. Domestic violence organizations help with all forms of abuse, not just physical. Legal aid can help protect assets. Therapists who specialize in trauma can guide healing. You don't have to do this alone. And you deserve better than someone who treats your heart and trust like they're worthless. So here I am, a year later. And someone asked me recently if I regret how I handled the situation. If I wish I'd been quieter, more private, less confrontational. My answer is no, not for a second. Greg spent months controlling the narrative, lying to me and everyone else, protecting his image while destroying my peace. The public exposure was justice. It was truth. It was the consequence of his choices. Would I recommend everyone handle betrayal the way I did? Not necessarily. Every situation is different. Some people need to leave quietly for safety reasons. Some prefer private dignity over public vindication. But for me, in my circumstances, refusing to protect Greg's reputation was an act of self-respect. It was saying my truth mattered more than his comfort. It was refusing to be the silent victim of someone else's cruelty, and I'd do it again. That said, the revenge wasn't what healed me. The exposure gave me satisfaction, helped me feel like I'd balanced the scales. But the healing came from rebuilding my life, from therapy and friendship and new experiences, from learning to trust myself again, from discovering I was whole and valuable on my own. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's living well. It's becoming someone so genuinely happy that your betrayer's opinion becomes irrelevant. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer every day. And that's enough. So let me ask you, wherever you are right now, whatever city you're listening from, what time is it for you? Are you driving to work, walking your dog, lying in bed, unable to sleep, because your own story sounds too much like mine? If this resonated, if you found yourself nodding along or feeling your heart race because you've been there or you're there now, do me a favor. Hit that like button, not for me, but as a signal to other women out there that they're not alone. that survival is possible, that you can come out the other side stronger. Drop a comment telling me where you're from and what you would have done in my situation. Would you have confronted him privately? Left without a word? Done exactly what I did? I want to hear your thoughts, your stories, your wisdom. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's being lied to or manipulated or made to feel small, share it with them. Sometimes we need to see someone else's survival to believe our own is possible. Before you go, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future stories. There are 2 other videos on your screen right now that I think you'll find interesting. One about a woman who discovered her husband's secret family. Another about financial recovery after divorce. Click on whichever speaks to you. And remember, your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. You're stronger than you think, braver than you feel, and you deserve a love that doesn't require you to shrink yourself or doubt your reality. Until the next story, take care of your heart. You only get one, and it's precious. This is Linda, signing off from Chicago, where the sun is setting over the lake, and tomorrow is full of possibility.